bringing that really authentic, bold, unapologetic characterization that Frey has to the game, I think is something that's really exciting, and especially exciting in terms of representation too.
Yes.
So that's really exciting.
Homer, come on, baby. Homer, holy shit. Okay, we gotta get out of here, now! No, no, no!
Trigger warning. The gameplay footage in this video is horrendous. I neither have the inclination nor the sadomasochistic tendencies to buy this game, play it for 50 hours and learn how it works, merely in a vain attempt to produce high quality gameplay footage, even if that were possible. But since I wanted to make a video about Forspoken, I decided the only sensible plan was to download the demo and run around like an arsehat just to get enough sub-game journalist footage together so I had some kind of shit to throw at the screen. I only needed a couple of hours footage, and that was simply not enough time to learn how to be a empowered, diverse female protagonist urban wizardess who bitches and whines all the time, like she would rather be making fucking TikToks than flying around a beautiful, if slightly empty, fantasy environment. Kids these days, you just can't please them, and 10 minutes on social media will prove that point. Believe it or not, at one point I was actually intending to review Forspoken properly, but when a game is launched and even the paid shills can't defend it, well, now you are dealing with something that is either completely based or utterly terrible. And I'm talking landfill fodder terrible. After having checked the landfill site and quickly establishing that it was the latter, I still felt compelled to at least discuss this game because of some of the implications of its launch. Now, I'm sure this might come as a surprise to many people, but I feel the need to defend Forspoken on at least a few specific grounds. I am absolutely not saying it's good. It's highly refined dogshit. But I'm looking at the bigger picture here, and the industry as a whole. So what is Forspoken? And why in God's name did someone inflict this monstrosity upon the world? Well, for now let's rule out spite, revenge, industrial self-sabotage, or the suggestion that this was the lead designer's idea of an elaborate practical joke. I'm not saying any of these options are necessarily impossible, but for now, let's try and focus on the facts we know. Forspoken is a giant, costly digital calamity, the video game equivalent of the Chernobyl disaster, if you will. Published by Square Enix, aka Squeenix. They are famous for Final Fantasy, the epic video game series, probably, Nier Automata, the upskirt simulator, definitely, and publishing this dogshit, factually. Oh, and despite being a company that used to be known for cranking out the odd good game, of late Squeenix has been more famous for constantly banging on about in-game crypto-based NFT initiatives, and a whole lot of other things that nobody wants to hear about whilst they're waiting for them to publish a video game that is not shit. But despite their occasional victories, Squeenix is frankly hitting the headlines most often these days for, well, being stupids. Forspoken is developed by Luminous Productions, formerly known by the catchy and jaunty title of Square Enix Business Division 2, which is an internal subsidiary unit of Square Enix, which thanks to this game, is being terminated. Torn apart, shredded, with all the staff being reassigned to other projects within the company that don't lick the sweat off a dead tramp's balls. There was a clue there that foreshadowed this entire calamity. Did you see it? This game was made by a company that used to have the words Division 2 in its name. You would assume people would be running away from the building screaming when they noticed that on the sign outside. FYI, Luminous Productions is based in Japan, the game director is Japanese, the producer is Japanese, the coders are Japanese, everyone involved in the production of this game is Japanese, apart from the voice actors and the 3 writers, who appear to be smoking crack. Someone might realise that getting a Japanese company to develop a game with a gurning, disgruntled American BIPOC urban teenage protagonist could possibly lead to some cultural issues with character development. And they would be right. In the same way that some asinine teenage TikTok star could not adequately characterise and write a good story about a middle-aged military general. Well, unless it's him, I guess. But you get my point. Then again, one could equally argue, and possibly I might, that they completely nailed the character of Frey, and she may represent an authentic, perfectly crafted facsimile of a certain specific type of young teenage narcissist that is all too common these days, thanks to the perfect storm of bad social and societal influences.
We have cupiosexual. Cupiosexual people are asexual people who still desire a sexual relationship but don't experience sexual attraction. Cupiosexual people may decide to have a sexual relationship despite not feeling sexual attraction while others don't.
Like someone took a cold fusion reactor, replaced all the lasers with feeds from Netflix, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram and modern progressive educators, tossed a young girl into the reaction chamber and baked her off until she came out babbling worse than the sort of dialogue that you'd get from a Seth Rogen remake of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Well, we prefer the term ooze, but yeah.
It's like more like, it's just nicer.
It rolls off the tongue better, yeah.
The strange part of all of this is Luminous Productions made Final Fantasy XIV. I have not played any Final Fantasy games, for my sins, but people tell me they're great. Sadly, however, since all the management are now committing ritual seppuku, and all the staff are being stripped of their titles, and reintegrated into the general militia of Square Enix, Business Division 2 won't be making any more games. Full stoppo. This was a Japanese company producing a game with a front and centre black female youth protagonist, and the only paper-thin barrier between them and total catastrophe was the tissue-thin CVs of the 3 writers. That's not good. In Forspoken, you play the part of the sort of grating teenage idiot that you hear talking on their phone in a supermarket, who is such a complaining, ungrateful cretin that you find yourself musing about whether an extinction-level event like a giant planet-killer asteroid or the Earth being fried to a crisp by a gamma-ray burst might actually have some upsides. You know what I'm talking about. The sort of girl whose parents buy her a Mercedes for her sweet 16th birthday, and she just bitches about it being the wrong colour.
I always told you I wanted a pink Mercedes-Benz.
Okay, I couldn't get the Mercedes-Benz, so you got that.
The mobile phone analogy is doubly appropriate because the protagonist actually spends time in-game in the fantasy world whipping out their fucking cell phone to take pictures. Just like real kids these days, you could wheel them up to an alien spaceship so that they could witness humanity's first contact with a non-terrestrial spacefaring civilization, and they would merely take a quick picture, then immediately go heads down into their phone, sending DMs to their pseudo-friends, and sending death threats to J.K. Rowling. Maybe in the future they'll make a version of Battlefield where you get achievements for taking selfies, posing over the dismembered corpses of the slain. And as soon as I said that, I realised it will most likely one day be a thing, if it isn't already. As the protagonist, you are in trouble with a gang, a black gang. Well, apart from the leader, the evil white leader, because white people are evil, and nobody wanted to stereotype black urban youth. No, seriously, this kind of racial topography is standard operating procedure in modern entertainment. You are supposed to make white people evil, and you can get in trouble for casting black actors as villains. I'm just interested in the facts, ma'am. Here is Tim Burton getting into trouble for not making the bullies white. And here is an actor and comedian complaining that Hollywood is too shit scared to cast non-white actors as villains. Like I said, just the facts. This is not my personal opinion. Through some kind of jiggery-pokery, you get transported to a rather pretty magical world of Final Fantasy-esque mystical sorcery and Harry Pottery, where it turns out you are some kind of magical wizard hero person. Because you are a whiny, dumber than dirt, nose-picking, sour-faced bitch who divides their time equally between non-specific complaining and being generally fucking ungrateful about the massive opportunity you've been given, you mostly just grumble about it. That's modernity, I guess. I told you that they might have actually nailed this character. You gather herbs, explore and do quests, all whilst flitting around with some kind of magical rocket boot spell and zapping enemies, because magic, all the while using a spellcasting animation that looks like you're flicking shit off your hand, which is frankly impressively awful. What was the design process here? Imagine some really drunk idiot trying to take a shit in the woods, failing horribly at using leaves to wipe his arse, resulting with a friendly fire butthole incident, and then trying to animate the imagined reflex action of said idiot when the full horror of the butt-poking finger accident dawns on their horror-filled face. I have personally witnessed someone trying to flick shit off their hand in a panic, and strangely it looked more like spellcasting than these animations. So I guess they even failed at fucking things up properly. The carefully crafted, underwhelming experience is further diminished by your talking bangle. You know how I referenced overhearing some griping teenager in a supermarket earlier? Well, her bangle is the equivalent of said teenager's depressing monotone disembodied voice coming out of a speakerphone.
Seems the break hasn't taken hold too thoroughly here yet.
Strangely, the dull and shitty monologues and arsehole quips from Cuff are done by the venerable supporting actor Jonathan Cake. How cool is that name? He's got cake! I like cake! He's an actor who always seems to show up as generic British spy hero analogue, just like he did in Chuck. I like him. Now for some reason, early game at least, they seem to have encouraged him to deliver his lines in a robotic monotone delivery, and they put a slight phase distortion on his voice. I can't quite nail it down, but you know when you encounter a character in a video game and their voice doesn't really match a man or a woman, and you start to wonder if they included a trans character just to appeal to the Twitter mob? That's what her talking bangle sounded like to me. And just in case I have thus far failed to sell this game to you, based on its comprehensive lack of merits, did I mention that in this game you can upgrade your powers by getting a fucking nail job? Not kidding. You can't make this shit up. They can, because they did make this shit up. But I doubt you could make this shit up, unless of course you were taking the piss and trying to dream up the dumbest game mechanics imaginable. In which case, I would say, bravo, you win. The environment and art style actually looked quite good. Seriously, it was nice enough. There is no doubting that the world is pretty interesting and mostly empty. I think people mainly took issue at the empty part. But even from my few hours of sucking around in the demo, you could appreciate that there was some underlying development skill here. The gameplay wasn't actually that shite. It wasn't that ugly a world. There were pretty sparkly things to grab the attention of my lizard brain, NPCs to kill, and it was obvious right off the bat that it was the characters that were the issue. The emptiness was an issue. But under the hood, there were some good things going on here. Thankfully, at least, this disaster of a game was cheap. Was it fuck? The Digital Deluxe Edition clocked in at £90, and the normal ball-sucking version cost £65. That is a lot of cash for an empty open world, a really annoying protagonist, and a trans bangle. There were, however, two areas where Forspoken truly shined, and I don't think anyone has given the developers enough credit for these lofty achievements, despite their work being absolutely world-class delivery. Firstly, it has updating key player tips. This is literally wonderful, and if I was reviewing this game, I would have started off by awarding them a bonus 5 out of 10 just for that. As someone who rebinds most of his keys, it is profoundly infuriating that these days, not only are most games fail ports from console, but just to put more piss in the beer, they combine this with non-dynamic player tips that always refer to the default key setup. So if you rebind them, you have no clue what to press. With Forspoken, if you rebind something, the tips show you what you updated the skill to. Marvellous. Yeah, take that one in the arse, FromSoft. Who's laughing now? Oh yeah, you are. Sony bought an even bigger share in FromSoft. It also has to be noted that the writing was not entirely terrible, and this game is absolutely not without humour. In fact, Forspoken contains one of the most magnificent comedy scenes in the history of video game entertainment, and one of the funniest skits that I've ever seen. I shit you not. At the end, they set the game up for a sequel. Talking of scenes, we need to set the scene in order for this video to make even the slightest bit of sense. So what is the context here? Pray, into what manner of world was Forspoken shat? Well, it is the darkest of dark days indeed. All of our beloved IPs are being transmogrified into daft, woke, public service announcements about how all of us, our kids and our future offspring, should become non-binary gender fluid furries, and sometimes even nonces. And all the white people should hate themselves because they are evil. Obviously. Really think about the standard remake, reboot or sequel these days. Seriously, look at what entertainment companies are doing to our beloved franchises. Far Cry 6, the once venerable franchise, whilst disintegrating for a host of contributing factors, reached peak nonce with Far Cry 6. You know how some schools in America are cancelling science classes because science is racist and prefer to take the kids on day trips to drag events in strip clubs populated by shady groomer types? Well, Far Cry 6 is basically the video game equivalent of said modern education policy. Battlefield Vagina, a game that introduced female Nazis, disabled female commandos, and rewrote the legendary saga of the heroes of Telemark so it was capped by a teenage girl instead. Solo, Battlefast 2040 Fail, a game where they got rid of classes and tried to get rid of leaderboards because they wanted a less competitive, more inclusive, more gender neutral war experience. And when the riot started because the game was so horribly bad, the developers jumped straight onto Twitter and started humble bragging about introducing a trans operator. There are cannibal serial killers who are less out of touch with reality than these fucking idiots. Call of Duty Vanguard World War Woke, a game that rewrote World War II history and turned the fighting force into a Benetton advert. Removed sides in the multiplayer because Allies versus Axis was just too divisive and judgmental. Forced you to play as a young lady when you first started grinding multiplayer. Set up the operators according to new diversity and inclusion criteria, so that despite being able to play as a German or a Japanese soldier or any number of nice ladies, whilst Britain lost over 6% of its male population during the war, white British soldiers were written out of the game entirely. And they still managed to bastardise and disrespect the legend of Sergeant Sidney Cornell, the real black paratrooper that landed during D-Day. Now, I have no strong principles about playing characters that align with my race and personal identity. If I did, I would only play games where I could play as a fat chip-eating man. And I would have been honoured to play Vanguard multiplayer as Sidney Cornell. I'm merely noting that writing white Brits out of World War II requires about the same amount of effort as rebooting the TV show Roots with an all-Icelandic cast. The Last of Us. They released a fantastic, popular, lucrative game, then released a DLC turning the female protagonist gay, which I didn't mind because lesbians are nice. Then released a sequel introducing a new gender non-conforming, read steroidal, antagonist and killed off the cisgendered white protagonist because he represented the patriarchy and toxic masculinity. If they continue on this progressive trajectory, I reckon that The Last of Us 3 will be a story about how a bunch of post-apocalyptical groomers and furries try to build a gender reassignment clinic in the apocalypse and kill anyone who even criticises their scheme because they are obviously fascists. Oh, and they will probably declare that clickers have rights too and let them into the base for the grand finale. Modern entertainment is largely a farce, and reboots are a special subdivision of weapons-grade stupidity. And don't even get me started on the bizarre excesses of franchise-destroying nonsense like Saints Row 2022 and Wolfenstein Young Thoughts. I'm trying to confine this discussion to video games, but suffice it to say the plague of corruption is spreading through franchises throughout the whole entertainment industry. Star Trek, piss on the memory of Picard. Peter Pan, they/them and Wendy. Lord of the Rings, cock rings of girl power. Everything Netflix does all the time ever. Star Trek Space Jesus. A show that is so politically correct that it has repeat appearances from a guy in a wheelchair. How offensive is that? Everyone else gets transporter beams, spaceships, rocket packs and positronic limbs. But this guy? Fuck him. He gets a chair with plastic wheels slapped on the side. Clearly the Federation in the politically correct alternative timeline just shrugged and thought, fuck that guy, he's white and straight. Just give the prick a wheelchair like they had 400 years ago. Toxic bastard. The hit list of franchises being beaten with a stupid stick is almost endless. This is the world we live in right now. If there is a franchise that you love, that you have fond memories of, which you cherish dearly, then bite down on the leather belt and prepare to receive some special prison rules punishment. Because it's just a matter of time before some fake posturing virtue signalling cuck rocks up outside your franchise's front door, wearing his rubber gloves, adult nappy and clutching a laptop, ready to destroy everything that you hold dear, just so he can rack up some woke points with his bosses and score as many World Economic Forum compliancy brownie points for the ESG rating so they can get given more CBDCs by BlackRock after the orchestrated economic crash. Please don't get me wrong, I am not against any of this progressive shit in principle. I think it's great that all people of all creeds and persuasion are represented in entertainment and creative endeavours. The rich cultural tapestry of art is more fully fleshed out when everyone has an equal chance of having their voices heard, their views promulgated and their kind respected. Even those wankers on TikTok.
Instead of using the typical mom and dad parent titles, there's actually gender neutral and non-binary parent titles that exist. So here are some examples. Dama, Mada, Maddie, Madi, Mappa, Nini, Nopa, Nori, Opa, Pere, Pom Pom, Zaza, and Zizi.
Freedom of speech is a wonderful thing, and for someone to claim it exists, it has to be unhindered, unrestricted and applied to everyone in society, because if a single voice is silenced, you no longer have freedom of expression, because by definition, it must be absolute. You can't have freedom of speech with a tiny little bit of censorship, because that means you don't have freedom of speech. All peoples of all colour, of all sexual persuasions, are all equally worthless, with the possible exception of groomers and the sort of furries that sneak into fields at night and engage in carnal acts of bestiality with sheep and horses. Chicken lovers, I don't mind, but stay away from the horses and the sheep, please. My point is that I have no issue with any of these particular issues. I have no problem with diversity in video games. I have an issue with diversity being blanket bombed into all of my favourite video game franchises all of the time, and I have a specific problem with the representation of any race as being inherently evil or morally bankrupt, whether that be directed at whites, Asians or anyone else. It's just reformulated racism and prejudice, only picking on a different target. You can use rhetoric and sophistry to claim it's not, but it is just old-fashioned racism, just rebranded and state-sanctioned and picking on a different target. And into this maelstrom of routine and normalised franchise annihilation, Forspoken came kicking and screaming into the world with its little slime-covered puckered face bawling for all it's worth in a manner strangely similar to its protagonist, Frey. And the rest, as they say, is history. Dragged over the coals by mainstream and credible journalists alike, everyone thought this game was terrible. And it is, for many reasons. But it is not without merit. So I guess the big question here is, why the hell am I defending this game at all? I'm getting sick to death with AAA publishers destroying my franchises. It's become almost routine for them to take something we love, add a healthy dose of Neil Cuckman, throw in a few pinches of Sarkeesian, and then boil it up in the cauldron of identity politics and serve up a stinking hot mess of propagandist nonsense. Then all the usual suspects creak out onto social media to pronounce that anyone who criticises these acts of cultural vandalism are Nazis, without any seeming sensitivity to the fact that it's actually the Nazis, the fascists and the communists that historically burn books, commit acts of cultural vandalism, ban movies, knock down statues of heroes, rewrite history and smash up the art museums. As I've said a few times now, I have no issues with people making woke games for woke audiences. If people want to make hyper-woke games based on progressive identity shit, then knock yourselves out. Figuratively, but hopefully literally, with a mallet. And I quote myself from a previous video. You do you. I will stand up for your rights of freedom of expression even if you creep me the fuck out and you make horribly shit video games. Plurality and diversity in opinion and expression is a truly wonderful thing, but let me have my games too. Don't come over here and smash my toys and try and force me to play with your dollies. Well, careful what you wish for, I guess, because this is precisely what they went and did. And frankly, I think it's great. Obviously, I don't mean that the game is great. The game is a giant turd swallowing competition, but I will happily applaud the sentiment and the intent behind Forspoken, because in its own weird and dysfunctional way, it is pursuing this noble goal. It is not smashing up my toys, and it is not trying to make me play with their dollies. Forspoken is a self-conscious attempt to create a new standalone IP based on and appealing to a modern audience of annoying female teenage mobile phone obsessed shitheads. You know, the kind of arsehatts that we overhear talking on their phones in supermarkets. Brilliant. It's basically Star Wars for the TikTok generation. And I applaud it. I applaud it because it's an original IP. It's not bothering me, and my life is no worse because this game exists. In fact, my life is better because this game exists. I got to watch some very entertaining videos reviewing this game, and some game footage that was so bad it was funny. And after all, even Trigglypuff and Big Red deserve to have their video games too, right? Forspoken has not destroyed any existing franchises. It has not taken any video game worlds, characters or lore that I am emotionally invested in and smashed them on the altar of modernity. No franchises were harmed in the making of this video game. And it stayed in its fucking lane. Forspoken is like someone threatening to burn down your house and if they've gone to the wrong address. What do I care? Go ahead. It's not my fucking house. Video it. Send me a copy. This game is appealing to and targeting its own idealised and possibly fictional target demographic. The same demographic that publishers appeal to when they are destroying existing franchises by killing our heroes and crushing the IP under a barrage of identity politics and racial topography. And I would note, it's possibly a demographic that might not exist. The demographic of people that probably don't play video games because they're too busy making dance videos in Walmart, trying to throw people off park benches so they can do their fitness vlog, or making TikToks about their dragon pronouns. I'm being serious. I think video game publishers might be targeting a fantasy demographic who they want to play video games, rather than a real demographic of actual, currently active players. I have no issues with publishers making shit video games to appeal to demographics that are not me, and which are not affecting franchises that I love. If my neighbour is really into asphyxie wanks, it's no skin off my nose if they strangle themselves in the fucking wardrobe, and nobody finds the body for 6 weeks. You be the best version of you. If it doesn't affect me, and it doesn't break my shit, anyone is entirely entitled to be as ridiculous as they like. I just hope they don't mind me sniggering at them. This game is essentially trying to appeal to an audience of teenage, inner city girls who like grumbling, going to nail salons, and complaining to their parents that the free stuff they just got for Christmas is the wrong kind of free stuff. And Forspoken has been completely transparent about that. There was no mismarketing. There was a free demo which you could play before purchasing, and they have been entirely unambiguous about the fact that this game has a frightfully annoying protagonist. Nobody can complain that this game snuck up on them unawares. I know there are some claims being made that Square Enix attempted to deceive the public by withholding review copies, but as far as I can tell, this is just shills dunking on the game because it's such a terrible train wreck. There's no financial incentive not to. Certainly from what I've found out, this entire scenario boils down to a few of the shill reviewer community didn't get their review copies. Boo fucking who. Surely you can appreciate the irony here. Access journalists and access reviewers trade their own objectivity, integrity and trustworthiness in exchange for early access copies of video games. So they can't be trusted anyway. There are complaints that a few access journalists didn't get their early access copies, and they are claiming this is tantamount to a deception. This is paid liars crying foul because they didn't get their opportunity to lie for pay. How fucking dare shills complain they didn't get early access copies in order to make their shill content, and chalk that up to deception. When a video game has a free playable demo and it's horribly shit, just like the game itself, how the hell can you claim they were trying to fool or deceive the customers? Short of hiring a mariachi band to stand under your window singing "Forspoken is shit, please don't buy it" in Spanish, they could not really have done more to telegraph how poor this product is. And credit to them for their integrity, of sorts. The other benefit of games like Forspoken is this. Nearly all video game publishers, including some unlikely suspects like CD Projekt Red, Activision and effectively every company under the umbrella of the Embracer Group, which is half the games in your library probably, and that includes Warhorse Studios, I'm sad to say, they have all signed up to ESG reporting now. So now they're all desperate to tick as many boxes as possible and pump as much woke, progressive, diversity and inclusivity horseshit into their games. If publishers can't rack up the ESG points in new IP, well they will just have to pump that shit into their sequels and reboots. Personally, I'm much happier that Square Enix spunks its ESG load into crap like Her, rather than ruining existing franchises instead. I would be elated if video game publishers confined all their ESG compliant shenanigans to new, original, standalone, woke as fuck, piss poor IP. If it means they will honour the tradition and respect the legacy of existing franchises, I thoroughly applaud it. In military terms, Forspoken is kind of like a soak-off. A well-defended target of opportunity that you present to the enemy to bait them into pointlessly wasting manpower and resources just to drain the enemy forces without conceding any real casualties yourself. The game also might be making a curious point about how modern progressive remakes of video games diminish brands, because this provides a side-by-side comparison. When publishers make a sequel or reboot and drench it in modern nonsense, they effectively have a captive audience. When publishers release train wrecks like Last of Us 2, Battlefield Vagina or Wolfenstein Young Sluts, they are very aware that people will knowingly buy the game just to see if it's as bad as everyone says, because they love the franchise and they just can't resist that curiosity. It's like when you hand someone a knife and warn them that it's sharp. They just have to touch the blade to see for themselves, even if that means getting cut. And I'm very curious about what proportion of the sales of games like these are simply curiosity purchases or hate purchases from die-hard fans that just couldn't resist seeing for themselves, like moths to the flame. Well, when people make sequels like these, a common sentiment is, what kind of demographic are they trying to appeal to? People who don't play video games? But the games still sell. Well, Forspoken at least managed to shed a little light on this conundrum, because it's a completely new IP appealing to that same precise demographic, it's not a remake, and it has no captive audience. And surprise, surprize, barely any fucker bought it. It's mostly been consigned to landfill sites, figuratively and literally. Kind of ironic really, because dumping hundreds of tons of plastic into landfill sites isn't particularly ESG compliant. FYI. I mean, how many blue-haired feminists did backflips when they discovered that they could now fulfill a childhood fantasy and finally get to roleplay as a female member of the Waffen SS with a Mohican haircut? And kill American soldiers? Actually, now that I frame it like that, it's probably more than I imagined. But certainly not enough to bankroll a video game. But the important conceptual issue here is that Square Enix made a game that is specifically and accurately targeting this precise demographic of young, shallow, cell phone obsessed, progressive types who are obsessed with racial justice and complaining. And not only was the game an unmitigated disaster, but the target demographic wasn't interested in buying this. Most likely because the target demographic mostly falls outside of the video game sphere. They ain't gamers. So I thank Square Enix Business Division 2 for their contribution to video game science. They have provided at least some empirical evidence that this particular demographic of obnoxious gamer probably doesn't exist. Ultimately, I would obviously prefer if video game companies didn't make shit video games at all. But if they are going to make shit video games, at least don't make shit sequels or ruin beloved franchises in the process. I'm delighted to see Square Enix trying to do this, by trundling off into the next room and making a nonsense game for a nonsense demographic that gets nonsense reviews, instead of taking something I care about off the shelf and doing a Neil Druckmann on it. So bravo for that. They are not smashing our toys, they are making their own little dollies to play with and ruining those instead. And that's fine. I have no moral or ethical problem with this terrible game. I think it's great Forspoken exists, because it's an IP that frankly does not shit on my lawn. It didn't wreck any of my favourite franchises, it didn't emasculate any of my favourite characters, it didn't retcon any of my favourite IPs. It didn't murder any of my heroes. It wasn't as bad as people make out. Okay, maybe it kind of was. But it at least came with a free demo. It was far less offensive than your average video game sequel, and nobody was tricked, catfished or betrayed. In fact, it's leading a specific demographic of gamer, like the Pied Piper of Hamelin, down to their own quiet part of the riverbank, where hopefully they can all go and drown. Metaphorically. I think. I do feel at least a little bit sorry for Ella Balinska. She was in the Charlie's Angels reboot, which was a turd. She was in the Resident Evil reboot, which was a turd. So being in an original failing IP instead of a failing reboot constitutes both a moral and ethical step up, I guess. Although Forspoken was a turd too. Christ. So far her career has been like wrapping your mouth around a sewer pipe, desperately hoping that the next thing that hits the back of your throat is not another turd. Good luck with that. Possibly she needs to get a new agent. She is quite hot though. Come on. I'm talking about the actual actress, not her in-game model. Her in-game model makes her look like someone combined a cosmetic surgery accident with a small boy. That is Mass Effect Andromeda levels of face schmoo. Well, I would love to stay longer to talk, but I need to finish a letter to my local MP. I'm trying to persuade them to bring back Victorian sanatoriums and repeal all child labour laws in the UK. It's about time we started stuffing some of these idiot kids up chimneys. But for now, good luck and happy hunting.